I've been thinking a lot lately about how things could have been different in terms of the situations that I've been in with like Bob Hartley, Sean Bowles. I haven't even talked about, my time with Todd Bentley or some of the other ministries that I've been around. I just, focused primarily on the more recent ones. Um, but the number one thing that came to mind and really felt pressed upon my heart was if I felt safer or if I felt there was a safer option, and I would have said something, I would have done something different. I would have felt that there was an option for me to reach out and ask for help. And um and I think that's really um an incredible opportunity, obviously moving forward, but perhaps an indictment on the current infrastructure available. Number one, I I largely worked for itinerant ministries that were isolated in a way. Whether they were connected to the church or not, the independent ministry or parachurch had its own separate thing. I call them islands. Like it's its own separate thing, and the structure within itself is isolating. It's not connected to the whole heart of an organization with many people involved. It has within itself its own accountability structure put in by the government. I think the framework of that is based on the Salvation Army. So it's not even really customized to the religious organizations that they are and the nuances that they have and the situations that present themselves. Because the Salvation Army is very different than these parachurch, itinerant ministries that we see today. Um, but I found myself working in these environments, and as independently freeing as they are, they come with their limitations and the lack of structure because it's solely relying upon the individual that you're following that sets these structures up for you for your success. And if they don't provide you a means of um, safe, passage to communicate your thoughts, your needs, your concerns, your desires, then it's non-existent. Um, and then obviously, as you can see, you can have shadow boards or fake boards where the people are there by name only and not actually there in any capacity. And how do you, as an employee, even check into that? Number one, you wouldn't even know to look into it initially, let alone if you did look into it, like it's not going to be very friendly upon you. If you're like, no, let me interview your board members and make sure that I agree with them, you're going to get passed over. You're not going to get hired because who wants that scrutiny? Now, I think one of the greatest opportunities that we have, and the thing that's pressed upon my life more recently, is just the awareness of God being the advocate. And there's a biblical framework for Jesus being an advocate for us well before we see anything else in a lot of regard, biblically speaking, in terms of the actions that the church, especially the charismatic church, currently adopts, uh, reaching out to the lost, the one that's run away, being the pastor who lays at the sheepfold and protects the flock, and in truly understanding what that means, because um, I describe it in a way. I mentioned it the other day to someone. I said, after you've been a victim of somebody else and you're out of the cloud, like you're aware of what happened to you now, you understand the facets of what took place. Because when you're in it, you really don't have a clue sometimes, and you can't really, formulate really good ideas around what to do and how to help yourself. But once you're out, you realize that there's this entire avenue of opportunity within within healing that is necessary, and your conversations are different based on the experiences you've had. Your relationships are different based on the experiences you had. Um, the way that you engage with people can change. Your mind can be rewired depending on the experiences you've had. And the way I described it to this individual more recently is that, like, most people just go in through the front door of the house, like, how are you doing? Like, how are you experiencing these things? How's your life? Like, it's normal, like normal pathways. But when you deal with someone who's been victimized, depending on where they're at in their process and their journey, and even being put on a pathway of being a survivor, you have to go in a different door. It's a different language. It's a different framework. It's a different understanding. And for most people, I don't believe that the church is fully equipped or even partially equipped to have these conversations at this point. They haven't pressed upon themselves the inclining to desire to learn these skills yet. And I think this is the realization that we're getting into, and an opportunity, a tremendous opportunity, because if if someone's been victimized, you you don't treat them like another just another person. Um, you know, I'm not saying that victims can't be healed and you can't have normal relationships. Of course you can. But once someone's been impacted by trauma, whether it's spiritual abuse, physical abuse, any kind of abuse, the the method and process in which they are brought into the fold, understood, um, embraced, and listened to, and then obviously solution oriented things that can be brought forth for them through, with them. um, that is something that is largely missing in the church, the Western church. The institution of the church just wants to go on with itself. It just wants to go on with its agenda. Like, it's an inconvenience to stop and have to deal with these quote unquote issues. But the realization as well is the church within itself is people. And I think the greatest opportunity we have, especially the people that are leading others, is to facilitate an environment where people can feel safe, and safe enough to communicate the deepest, darkest parts of their experience in their lives. And and I'm not necessarily going to get into the nuance of maybe how that could happen, because I think it does take considerable effort in terms of laying out the safe measures, and maybe that's a conversation for later. But for me, in my case, I keep going back to the idea that if I was given a 1-800 number, and at the beginning of every one of my employments, and it was detached from the individual that employed me, and I could speak to a trauma informed um, person who basically takes and fields the initial inquiry. And you say, "Hey, what's going on? What are the concerns that you have?" And they say, "Hey, you've got an issue. Oh, that sounds like an HR issue. Go talk to your HR about that." And they're like, "Okay, well, here's this other thing. I feel like I might have been abused. I feel like I'm in this abusive situation." They're like, "Okay, that's something that we need to address. That's something we need to talk about. That's an issue that we need to, dive into more. Now we're going to start a process to get to the bottom of that." And um, I feel like if there was a safety net in a person that I felt like I could go to, that was widely distributed and available to me, I I feel like I probably would have done that right away if I knew I was protected. And the reason why I didn't speak up for so long is I didn't feel the safety. I didn't feel the safe protection of doing so because when you stand up against these perceived individuals that have power, they'll crush you and they'll send their minions after you, and they'll take away job opportunities, and they'll like just the gamut goes on and on and on. I've heard a million, I'm exaggerating in terms of a million situations, but I've heard an abundant amount of situations, where even big ministries that have lots of money, they send their legal after you, and they even if you're telling the truth, even if what you experienced was true, even if you were victimized by them or someone around them, they'll put you in a legal process and then drain you of all your resources. And then, and I know of one with a big TV ministry that's doing that with a few individuals. And then in other cases, they'll do absolutely everything they can to try to undermine you because it goes against this powerful person's ministry. And we've seen a lot of silencing that takes place there, and so it's incredibly difficult waters to pursue. The thing that goes down to the bottom of my heart, and I know we feel very strongly about, like, if more people come out, then more truth will be exposed, and and I genuinely believe that it's the last resort for a victim to speak out. It's it is not in any way the preferable method to reach any type of resolution in my mind at this point, from my own perspective. And I could be wrong, and I know there's biblical basis for, making things public, but um the the level of scrutiny, the level of public cross-examination, exposure, the people questioning your motives, questioning your intention, questioning the decisions that you made, going through that. It's tough enough, I think, for a healthy person to go through something like that, let alone someone who may have been in a tremendous physical abuse or spiritual abuse and is still working through the pain and the intricacies of that in their life. um I feel like I had it light, like it wasn't um as life altering in some ways as some others of stories that I've heard. um the abuse is something that most definitely affects every single area of your life, and depending on what you've experienced and what you've encountered, you, it's sometimes extraordinarily hard to even consider recovering from that. The mental, the physical, the spiritual, I mean, literally every facet of your life, you are a different person. And so going through that and then saying, like, oh yeah, you just share your story publicly and then it'll all get better, um, it's not necessarily the case at all. Um, and in most cases, as I said, it's a last resort. It's because people feed off of the, sensationalized, news cycle, and they'll support you for a moment and then forget about you. And what support systems do you have when you've exposed yourself, your story on the internet, for the world to see and pick apart? If you don't have any support systems, then who's going to be there for you? When they stop talking, when they stop supporting, when they stop helping, because there's some other news cycle to be on. Um, and that's just how it goes. And so there's really truly thinking about, what does it take for a victim to get to a place of accountability with their abuser, and how do they get the help they need in a safe way? And I think I think it's just having the heart of God for these kinds of situations where there is a bit of vetting, um, because I think the hesitancy within the church is, uh, the people will bring accusations, and which happens all the time, and they're unfounded and they're ridiculous and they're crazy. And how do you deal with that stuff in addition to actually dealing with the real, true victims? And then there's this whole layer, which is, uh, uh, understood, because of self-preservation within the church, of them actually having the issues, knowing about the issues, and refusing to act on these issues and refusing to do the right thing about these issues. That's a whole nother layer, within the church. But I first want to bring awareness, to just the posture and the heart of, uh, the church needing to be the strong advocate and needing to be the one who lays at the sheepfold, the one who's willing to chase after, those that are lost. And I'm not just talking about an evangelistic sense and trying to get them into the building. Let me use this example. I've written 47 something books. I'll hopefully have my 50th book done here in the next month or so. Um, and after going in with everybody's stories, they share a story, they share their journey. I'm writing their stories. I'm realizing that I could write this in my own voice, my own perspective. But the thing that they need most is for me to write it in their voice and in their perspective. So over the last, let's say, 17 plus, years, 20 years, I've developed a skill set of, not only hearing my own voice when I see something, but now seeing it and reading it and understanding, text, from someone else's perspective. And and I think this is what makes me such a good writer and why I've had so many repeat customers. And right now, honestly, I'm beyond blessed. Like, I feel like God gave me, an opportunity, of redemption. Once I shared my story, like, I have more work than I've ever had in my life, and I love it. And the projects I'm working on are fantastic. And I don't promote. I I do a little promotion for certain kinds of projects, but the projects I'm working on right now, like, I didn't do any promotion for. Um, and so, really feel blessed by God, and it's just absolutely incredible. I'm so busy, and that's why I haven't made so many videos. But um, it's really, really wonderful, and my heart is so full. I get to work on these life changing projects. Um, but the thing that, I think makes what I do successful is I'm able to understand the need, the desire, and the goal from the other person, and then I translate that into the book. I translate that into text and writing. And, right now, if you look at the church, primarily speaking, you get an individual who speaks on behalf of themselves, and maybe sometimes they speak on behalf of the church, but they're never speaking on behalf of the individual in front of them or even understanding what that individual's needs are. So when you're face to face with somebody, it takes emotional intelligence to dive in and actually understand the heart of their situation, the heart of what they need, their pain points, their successful journey, their, areas of opportunity, and where you can speak on their behalf. Now, I think in some regard, it's emotional intelligence to learn and to know, but in a, Christ-like sense, as being an advocate, you not only see, but you act on behalf of the advocate, on behalf of Christ. And so, in some sense, you have like a Mike Bickle situation who could read people really well, and that's what made him so successful, but he used it for his own gain. In this case, I'm talking about reading people, um, for what they need, but you respond in a Christ-like manner. Because if somebody's coming to you and they're saying, I've been victimized by this individual, um, you don't think and act based on how you would perceive the situation because you have not been victimized. You need to think and act based on how they are perceiving the situation. And that allows you to see transparently with discernment the truth with inquiry, and allows you to gain access to their heart, their mind, because maybe they truly were victimized. And this is an understanding it from their perspective would bring you pause, and then it would bring action because love always has action to it. But if if they're sharing a story and they're sharing a story about how they've been victimized, and there's inconsistency and selfish motives and narrative control and whatever else in there, you can realize this person actually has a victim mindset and they're operating from that, and you can get them help too, but it's different than this is actually a victim. I'm speaking about a skill set that goes beyond discernment, because it's an emotional intelligence piece, but it also is a skill set of being a trauma informed, in the sense of victims, because largely we think every conversation that we have, and we respond based on what we think about ourselves and how we would respond. But I think one of the greatest things we could possibly do is not just think and respond based on whatever defensive posture we have, or whatever idea we have as a church. They're so protective of their image and their reputation and their bottom line, that they respond accordingly. And so you get comments like, well, this would hurt the church if we said something like that. And and obviously that's not thinking in the best interest of the individual who's standing there saying, I've been victimized. And so it's not necessarily to say that every victim, every person that comes forth says victim, victim, is a true victim of whatever they're claiming to be. But what we can do is we can understand that they're in pain, and we can understand that they have a need, and that should put us on a path of curiosity, and with the right skill sets we can lead them down the right path. And I think as the church starts to understand what it means to actually be an advocate, we'll build a framework where it's not just um, a an expression of activism, which is just promoting, um, you know I guess the tenets of the problem. But what it will do is it'll take advocacy and bring us into a place of true advocacy, of supporting individuals rather than just addressing problems, because it's so easy to communicate problems on a persistent basis, and say, this person has this problem. We're gonna rally around and support and shut them down and label them and turn them off and cancel them. And it's so different to bring in advocacy, which brings in restoration and it brings in healing. In restoration, obviously, biblically speaking, Galatians 6:1, restore one, is unto God. It's unto God. I believe wholeheartedly it's selfish motives that says the individual needs to be restored to the place of power, especially the place in which they fell so they fell so far. You get individuals in the church that have abused or mistreated individuals, groomed them, sexually groomed them, manipulated them, and then we're like looking at well, this is their career path. We need to restore them unto their career path. The Bible doesn't say anything about that, and it's it's extremely selfish and misguided to say, well, let's just restore them unto their career path because that's where they were. Um, I'm under the initial impression right now, and this may change. Um, if if somebody has a particular sin in in a particular area, let's say they're a pastor and they're grooming, they're a male pastor and they're grooming understudies and interns and things like that, assistants, and sexually grooming them and grooming them in that way. If they've fallen in that regard, then it's a one strike, you're out. You can't be in that position anymore. Why would anybody put them in that position again? It's like, even the courts of law with, the one strike rule on the firearms policies and stuff. Like, if you've, shot a loaded weapon at, at your friend, you shouldn't be allowed to touch a gun again. It's like, oh, well, I'll do better next time. You're like, are we willing to give you that chance? And then you get individuals, especially, other ministries. I won't mention a bunch of names, but I've heard this before, especially from big ministries. And one particular ministry comes to mind where they're like, they needed the practice within the restoration. And the practice was to get back into that exact same position, leading people. And guess what happened? Of course, they went back in and they fell back into the same sin. Now, it's not to say that the individual can't be in ministry or in some type of ministry. There's a million, and I'm exaggerating, there's a million kinds of ministry you could be in. You could be in online prayer. You could write. You could, go on missions and, and build houses, whatever. Like, there's so many other things you could be doing apart from being in this exact same position where you've proven to be a groomer and a abuser. And so of course there's options, but I think it's short-sighted and selfish for us to just automatically assume that any type of restoration brings you back into the exact same lane, because um, we're not prioritizing in any regard the person who's been victimized. We're simply saying that their experience is not worthy of protection. And that's what I felt when I see, forms of accountability go unchecked. And, um, and I felt, well, there's no real options for me here, to get any type of resolution. Um, because I didn't feel safe. And if I had felt safe, then I might have had different outcomes. And I don't blame people. I am curious though, and I'd like to believe that whatever my efforts have been and my efforts will be, that it'll help create an opportunity for a more public discussion, for churches to create safe passage, safe pathways for these conversations to be had. Um, because the natural inclination is to go and do things, and not really describe the process and not really share everything. And I know there's big institutions right now that that knew about Sean's misdeeds, and they didn't act on them in the ways that they should have acted on them. And um, the greatest opportunity right now is for them to display a process and a safe passage that they're willing to stand by to to bring about the safety and security of everybody, and that's being the advocate. And the other thing, that comes to mind is the insecurities that present themselves when you've been in such a convoluted, I would say in a lot of ways, narcissistic, gaslighting, grooming style, uh, settings. Is you don't sometimes know what's up and what's down because you just believe what you're told, and you're gullible in a way because you've been so conditioned to be that, because you have to be a follower, because if you're not a follower, you get kicked out, um, and because you need to be pliable, and if you're not pliable, then you're no good to the individual that needs absolute control. They need control over you, and if they don't feel that control over you, they'll find a reason to get rid of you, and that's imperative, I think. And so I'm mentioning that because the safe system is a system that understands the situations that victims have been in, and understands how to get them out of it too. And so it's the communication, it's the steady communication of being an advocate, and standing up and representing and supporting and communicating regularly and consistently and repeatedly, the support system and support that's available, um, because the thing that they have going on in their mind continuously is what they've been conditioned in. It's not what's necessarily available, and it takes a lot of effort to get them out of that, a lot of considerable effort to get them out of that, and very skillful effort in some ways. Years of skill to uncondition someone out of that, narrative control and abuse. And so it's really an opportunity for us to look at, I think, and my hope, church wide. Uh, how can we be an advocate to our people in a way where it's not about our own personal motives, and not about our own personal agenda, and not about protecting our reputation, um, but not being scared when people speak, and not being scared when people say things that you don't like, and being okay with hearing difficult things, and having the stomach to process other people's pain, and that's okay. I just think of Jesus going to Lazarus, and he knew the outcome. He knew what he was going to do. He knew what was going to happen. But he stopped and he listened to Mary's pain, and he processed that with her, and he cried with her. And some could say, so unnecessary, Jesus. You already know you're going to heal Lazarus. Why would you stop and deal with that? What a distraction. But it's not forgetting, the individuals that are in front, because in some ways, Mary could have perceived that situation and been a victim of neglect, feeling neglected, feeling left out, feeling abandoned, feeling like all these promises were there for her, and God failed her. And could have felt that way. I'm not wanting to interject, fully into her motives or her thoughts, but she clearly needed Jesus to stop and weep with her, and that was important for God to stop and process with her. And as important as it would be, especially for the charismatic church, to look at a situation like that and say, let's go heal the sick, let's go pray for the guy to be raised. um mary's Mary's situation was equally, if not more important in that moment, for Jesus to, you know, experience with her than it was even with Lazarus in terms of that order. And I think we skip ahead and we were like, well, Jesus has compassion. That's why he stopped and wept with her. But that was his mission. And I think that's what an advocate means. He saw the need that Mary had, and he stopped what he was doing and he met that need. And the most important thing, and the thing I've tried to communicate in this video, is Jesus didn't see it for himself, because I think a lot of the charismatic world, especially the ones we see today, would have just walked right past Mary and said, you know, here's the outcome that you wanted, get over it. You know, you didn't believe enough, you know, whatever it may be. But realizing that Mary too was equally as important in God's eyes in that moment. And the essential response of God was to see from her perspective that moment and meet the need that she had. And I think that's what we need to do. And so when people speak out of pain, when they're scared, when they have anxiety, when they're traumatized, the church should not step back and fear and be scared, especially even when they lash out at the church of being irresponsible and this and then that. The church should embrace them and should say, um, I love you. I see you. I see your pain. I want to help you. How can I help you? What can we do? And that's exactly what Jesus did to Mary. And I think the willingness is the first step. You know, we have to push aside the agenda of what we feel like we want to accomplish that day. If we're going to lead people, we have to begin to see people and give time and space for them. And I think that's really truly loving well. Um, and the schedule obviously has to be adaptable for that. Um, and then I believe the advocate, the one who uh, wants to fight for us and show up for us and represent us, uh, can be displayed in the most beautiful ways uh, if we're open. But we have to be open to the difficult parts of people's journeys, and uh, we got to be able to hear difficult things and process difficult things, and understand that people say things out of pain, and sometimes it's their own reality. It's not necessarily the absolute reality. I'll end with this. Um, there's this thing called relative truth and absolute truth, and I've got some friends that are like, no, there's only absolute truth. I'm like, all right. So we're walking down the street together. Uh, we both look at the same thing. You have feelings and thoughts that come into your mind. I have feelings and thoughts that come into my mind, and that's different. We all have our own personal experience. I'm fashioned by my own experience, by my history, by my perceptions, by my beliefs, by my value systems. That shapes my experience. It shapes my perspective. Others come with their own perspective, their own lens, and they see the world through that. But we may see two different things, and that's truly a relative experience. It's relative to us. And I think it's important to note, I'm not just talking about like, well, I have my own, you know, it's my own personal truth. there's a lot of healthy framework within your own personal truth. It's what you know, it's what you believe, and it's distinct and separate from the other person. So I'm not saying it's a justifiable means, it's a perception. It's not justifiable for why you believe that way. That's another story. It's a perception that you have. And so there's individuals that can go through an experience um, and see something and have a completely different outcome than you. And we see that every day. You know, if you're married, if you've got a spouse, you've got kids, they can look at the same situation and have totally different outcomes. uh, I'm married and I have a kid, and so I see it every day. You know, with my 1 year old, and then there's absolute truth with what Christ presents, what we see biblically speaking, and what we see is absolute. We're working towards that. So the goal is not to try to coerce our situation and our perception to our truth, but it's to continuously try to work towards the truth and the refinement of what God provides us with in Scripture, and the truth of who He is, of Christ, Christ in us. And so we're working towards finding that, but we're not always there. So we see things differently, and I think it's very important as we consider what it means for Jesus to be an advocate, to look at how God would see this person, how God would see this situation, not from our own eyes, but from His perspective. And so it takes a level of depth, emotional intelligence, clarity, and theology for us to have that framework. Because going in with the will of God, looking at this person with the will of God, we have to have that framework that's healthy. Because if you have an unhealthy framework, then you're projecting all of your unhealthy thoughts, your unhealthy victim mindsets, your unhealthy views on the people that you're speaking against or to. And so it's it really is it is a personal journey to get to that, where we can be true advocates for others and represent them the way that God would want us to represent them, not just picking and choosing things and labeling it around Scripture and then making our own narrative so we can push our own agenda, but truly seeing it from the heart of God, and in creating scenarios where victims feel safe and victims are given the safest passage for healing and restoration. And so thanks so much for jumping on again and following, tracking with my journey. And thank you for the encouragement. Like I said, I've been tremendously blessed in this season. And I'm so busy and I love it. And um, I hope to make more videos when I get time. But uh, I encourage you to check out all the scriptures on Jesus being an advocate, because I feel like it should be in the heart of every believer. God bless you guys.